So there I was, watching the greatest culinary disaster in galactic history unfold. And honestly, I should have seen it coming. The Galactic Hunger Trial wasn't exactly what you'd call a beginner-friendly cooking competition. Picture this: a cosmic challenge so impossible that entire civilizations had been scratching their tentacles, claws, and various appendages over it for 3,000 years. The goal? Feed the void devourers, ancient cosmic entities with appetites so legendary they once ate an entire solar system because the planets looked crunchy. Our contestants today were the usual suspects. First up, we had Zephyr, a crystalline being who looked like someone had turned a chandelier into a perfectionist chef. Every movement was precise, every gesture calculated. This guy probably measured his breathing. He'd spent 2 centuries perfecting the art of geometric cuisine, which sounds impressive until you realize it tastes like chewing on a math textbook. Then there was Grok, representing the Bruthan Empire, with all the subtlety of a supernova. Picture a walking boulder with anger management issues and a plasma torch for seasoning. His cooking philosophy was simple. If it wasn't on fire, it wasn't food. He'd won 17 galactic barbecue championships by basically turning everything into charcoal and calling it flavor enhancement. Our third contestant was Wisp, an ethereal gas being from the luminous nebula who absorbed nutrients through photosynthesis. Wisp communicated in musical tones that sounded like wind chimes having an existential crisis. Their approach to cooking involved manipulating light wavelengths to somehow create flavor, which was about as practical as it sounds. And then there was Jake Martinez. Jake was a 32-year-old plumber from Toledo who'd taken a wrong turn at the Interdimensional Travel Expo and accidentally signed up for the most dangerous cooking competition in the known universe. He stood there in his faded jeans and a t-shirt that read, "I fix what your husband fixed," holding a backpack and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the cosmos. The trial took place on planet Zerion, a desolate rock floating in the disputed territories that made the surface of Mars look like a tropical paradise. The challenge was simple in concept, impossible in execution. Create a meal that would satisfy the void devourers, using only ingredients found on this barren wasteland. The catch? The void devourers hadn't been satisfied by anything in 3 millennia, and when they got cranky, they tended to eat whoever was nearby. "Welcome, contestants," announced the trial master, a floating geometric shape that somehow managed to sound bored despite having no discernible mouth. "You have 72 standard hours to complete the impossible. Begin whenever you're ready to fail spectacularly." Jake raised his hand. Excuse me, but I think there's been a mistake. I was looking for the bathroom." The trial master's glow dimmed with what could only be described as cosmic disappointment. "The universe has a sense of humor, human. Proceed." What happened next was like watching a masterclass in how not to cook for interdimensional entities with eating disorders. Zephyr started first, naturally, because perfectionist types always think they know better. He began by analyzing the soil composition of planet Zerion with instruments that probably cost more than Jake's entire neighborhood. Every rock was measured, every grain of space dust categorized. He arranged his findings into mathematically perfect geometric patterns that would have made Euclid weep with joy. "Behold," Zephyr announced, his crystalline form refracting light into rainbow patterns. "The perfect crystalline nutrient matrix, designed for optimal molecular absorption and aesthetic appreciation." It looked like someone had bedazzled a pile of gravel. The first void devourer, a writhing mass of darkness with more teeth than seemed mathematically possible, approached Zephyr's creation with what might have been curiosity. It took one tentative bite, paused, and then made a sound like a garbage disposal trying to digest disappointment. "Tastes like geometric sadness," the void devourer rumbled, its voice echoing from somewhere between dimensions. "Also, my teeth hurt now." Grok stepped forward, cracking his knuckles like gunshots. "Ha! Crystalline fool thinks cooking is about pretty shapes. Grok show you real cooking." What followed was less cooking and more controlled demolition. Grok fired up his plasma torch and began systematically setting everything on fire. Rocks, weeds, the ground itself. Nothing was safe from his culinary enthusiasm. Within minutes, he'd created a hellscape that looked like the aftermath of a particularly angry volcano. "Behold!" Grok bellowed, his eyebrows now completely singed off. "The flames of flavor!" The second void devourer approached cautiously, probably because the area around Grok's cooking station was still actively on fire. It took a bite of what might have once been a rock but was now mostly carbon and regret. "This tastes like screaming," the void devourer observed. "But louder." Grok beamed with pride until he realized that wasn't a compliment. Wisp floated over next, their gaseous forms shimmering with confidence. They began absorbing different wavelengths of light and somehow channeling them into the sparse vegetation scattered across the planet. It was actually kind of beautiful, like watching a living prism dance with starlight. Through the harmony of photosynthetic flavor manipulation, Wisp chimed in their melodic voice. "I shall create sustenance from pure luminous energy." The result was a collection of glowing plants that looked like they belonged at a rave, not on a dinner plate. The third void devourer approached and took a careful bite. Immediately, it began glowing the same color as the plants. Then it started floating. Then it began speaking in what sounded like interpretive dance. "I can see sounds and taste colors," the void devourer exclaimed. "But I'm still hungry. And now everything looks like Tuesday." While his fellow contestants were failing in increasingly spectacular ways, Jake had been wandering around planet Xerion with his hands in his pockets, looking less like a chef and more like a tourist who'd gotten very, very lost. "This is insane," he muttered, kicking at a clump of space weeds. "How am I supposed to cook anything with rocks and whatever this stuff is?" He picked up one of the weeds, which looked like parsley if parsley had given up on life and decided to live in space. The void devourers were getting restless. They'd started eyeing the contestants with the kind of interest usually reserved for appetizers. "If no one can feed us properly," the first void devourer announced, "we might just have to eat you instead. Nothing personal, it's just been a really long 3,000 years. Jake looked around at his fellow contestants, Zephyr reorganizing his failed geometry, Grok still setting random things on fire, and Wisp accidentally turning nearby rocks into disco balls. Then he looked at his backpack, sighed deeply, and said the most human thing possible under the circumstances. "Well, this is stupid, but I guess I'm here now." While the alien contestants continued their impressive displays of how to turn perfectly good ingredients into abstract art projects, Jake decided to do something radical. He started paying attention to what was actually available. "Okay," he said, pulling out a worn notebook from his backpack. "When in doubt, make soup. That's what Grandma Martinez always said." He started collecting the space weeds everyone had been ignoring, and here's where things got interesting. While Zephyr had been analyzing their molecular structure and Grok had been setting them on fire, Jake actually tasted one. It was bitter, sure, but it reminded him of dandelion greens, which his grandmother had somehow turned into something edible. "You know what?" Jake said to nobody in particular. "These aren't half bad, just need some work." The other contestants paused in their various failures to watch Jake do something none of them had considered, treating the ingredients like actual food instead of a cosmic puzzle to solve. Jake found a natural depression in the rock that could hold water. Well, what passed for water on this planet? It was slightly purple and tasted like pennies, but it was wet, and that was a start. He gathered some of the local stones that looked clean, heated them up using Grok's discarded plasma torch, much more carefully than Grok had, and used them to heat the water. "Primitive techniques," Zephyr observed with crystalline disdain. "Heating stones for thermal transfer? How barbarically inefficient." "Yeah, well, my barbarically inefficient techniques won't give anyone geometric indigestion," Jake replied, pulling out a small container of salt from his backpack. "Plus, I brought seasoning." This caused a minor sensation. The alien contestants had been so focused on their advanced techniques that none of them had considered the revolutionary concept of making food taste good. Jake started cleaning the space weeds, removing the bitter outer leaves and finding the tender parts inside. He chopped them up with a pocket knife that had probably seen more kitchen duty than camping adventures. As the purple water heated up, he added the cleaned weeds and a pinch of salt. The smell that started wafting across planet Xerion was something none of the contestants had expected. It actually smelled like food. Grok stopped setting things on fire and sniffed the air. What is that scent? It does not smell like burning. It smells like comfort? Wisp chimed, their gaseous form shifting colors with confusion. Zephyr calculated for a moment. The molecular aromatic compounds are surprisingly harmonious, but how is this possible with such rudimentary methods? Jake stirred the pot with a stick he'd found, the same way his grandmother had taught him to stir soup when he was 7 years old. It's possible because sometimes the best solutions are the simple ones. These weeds aren't poison, they're just bitter. A little heat, a little salt, and suddenly they're not so bad. The void devourers had stopped their threatening postures and were now floating closer, drawn by the smell. The first one spoke up. Is that actual food? Not geometric art or controlled explosions or whatever that light show was? It's soup, Jake said simply. Well, space soup, but soup nonetheless. He pulled out a small container of black pepper from his backpack, another exotic earth spice that might as well have been magic to his alien competitors. A tiny sprinkle transformed the aroma completely. The first void devourer cautiously approached Jake's cooking station. Jake ladled some of the soup into a makeshift bowl carved from a stone and offered it up. The void devourer took a sip, then another. Then it stopped looking like it wanted to eat everyone. This, the ancient entity said slowly, tastes like food. Actual, real, satisfying food. How did you do this? Jake shrugged. I just treated the ingredients like they were ingredients, not like they were some cosmic riddle to solve. Plus, I brought spices from home. For the first time in 3,000 years, a void devourer smiled. Well, it was hard to tell with all the teeth, but the threatening aura definitely shifted to something more like contentment. The other void devourers crowded around Jake's cooking station, and for the first time since arriving on planet Xerion, they weren't talking about eating the contestants. This was progress. More, the second void devourer said simply. We require more of this. Soup. Jake looked at his small pot, then at the dozen hungry cosmic entities surrounding him. Okay, but I'm going to need help, and I mean actual help, not more geometric food art or arson. This is where things got interesting. Jake started teaching the alien contestants the basics of cooking, not advanced techniques or molecular gastronomy, just the simple principles that somehow 3 advanced galactic civilizations had completely missed. Zephyr, Jake said, you're really good at precision, right? I need you to clean these weeds, but not with instruments. Just pull off the bad parts and keep the good stuff. Think of it as edible geometry. Zephyr's crystalline form brightened. Edible geometry? Why did I never consider the consumption optimization of structural integrity? Because you were too busy making food that looked good instead of food that tasted good, Jake replied. Here's a revolutionary concept. Food is supposed to be eaten, not displayed in a museum. While Zephyr worked on creating perfectly uniform vegetable pieces, because of course he did, Jake turned to Grok. Grok, I need you to not set anything on fire. But fire is flavor, Grok protested. Fire can be flavor, but not if everything turns to ash. Here, help me heat more rocks, but gently. Think of it as controlled flavor enhancement. Grok looked confused by the concept of not incinerating everything within reach, but he managed to heat stones without creating a miniature hellscape. Progress. Wisp presented a different challenge. How does one who absorbs nutrients through photosynthesis contribute to the preparation of consumable matter? Jake thought about this. Well, you manipulate light, right? Can you use that to help me see what I'm doing better? Like a really fancy cooking light? Wisp's gaseous form shimmered with what might have been excitement. Illumination enhancement for culinary precision. This is not how I typically engage with sustenance creation. That's because you've been thinking about food all wrong, Jake said, starting his second pot of soup. Food isn't just about getting nutrients. It's about bringing people together, sharing something good, making life a little less terrible. As they worked, Jake pulled out his worn notebook, his grandmother's recipe collection, written in a mix of English and Spanish with little notes in the margins like add more garlic, And don't let Bobby help with this one. The alien contestants watched in fascination as Jake improvised variations on his grandmother's soup recipe. Same basic technique, different combinations of the space weeds they'd found. Some were more bitter, so he added more salt. Some were tougher, so he cooked them longer. Some had interesting flavors that reminded him of herbs from Earth, so he highlighted those. You are creating multiple variations from identical base ingredients, Zephyr observed. The mathematical possibilities are endless. Now you're getting it, Jake said. Cooking isn't about following exact formulas. It's about understanding what you have and making the best of it. Grok had stopped trying to set things on fire and was now fascinated by the concept of controlled heat. So, flame does not need to consume everything? It can be gentle? Revolutionary idea, I know, Jake replied. Try not to let it go to your head. Wisp was providing perfect lighting for their cooking area and had started experimenting with using light to warm ingredients instead of just making them glow. This collaborative sustenance creation is far more engaging than solitary photosynthetic absorption. By the time they'd made their 5th pot of soup, each with subtle variations in flavor and preparation, the Void Devourers were actually having conversations instead of making threats. They were comparing flavors, discussing preferences, and for the first time in millennia they seemed genuinely satisfied. The humans' approach is fascinating, one of them rumbled contentedly. Simple ingredients, simple techniques, but the results are complex and satisfying. Jake wiped his hands on his jeans. That's because I'm not trying to impress anyone, I'm just trying to make something good to eat. The alien contestants looked at each other. Well, Zephyr and Wisp looked at each other. Grok was still figuring out controlled heat application, and seemed to realize something important had happened here. What started as a desperate attempt to avoid being eaten had turned into something unexpected. The first successful dinner party planet Xerion had ever seen. The Void Devourers were no longer the terrifying cosmic entities they'd been when this whole thing started. Fed properly for the first time in 3,000 years, they'd transformed into something more like satisfied dinner guests with too many teeth and concerning dietary habits. Jake had expanded his operation into a full cooking station, with Zephyr providing precise vegetable preparation, Grok managing multiple heating stations without setting the planet on fire, and Wisp creating the perfect ambiance lighting. They'd made soup, roasted space vegetables, and even figured out how to make a decent bread substitute from some grain-like seeds they'd found. You know what the funny thing is? Jake said, stirring another pot while keeping an eye on Grok's grilling technique. I bet every species that tried this challenge before us had the same problem. They were so focused on being impressive that they forgot the point was to feed someone. The lead Void Devourer, now lounging contentedly after its 5th bowl of soup, made a sound that might have been cosmic laughter. Oh, human, you have no idea how right you are. That's when things got weird. Well, weirder. The air around them began to shimmer, and suddenly planet Xerion didn't look quite so barren. The Trial Master's geometric form expanded and shifted, revealing something far more complex underneath. Congratulations, the Trial Master announced, and now its voice carried warmth instead of cosmic boredom. You have passed the Galactic Hunger Trial. Wait, Jake said, looking around at his fellow contestants. That's it? We just had to make decent food? The trial was never about advanced cooking techniques, the Trial Master explained. It was about understanding that hunger, true hunger, is solved not through showing off, but through sharing knowledge and working together to create something nourishing. Zephyr's crystalline form dimmed with what might have been embarrassment. All those centuries perfecting geometric cuisine, and the answer was collaborative simplicity? Every species that attempted this trial before approached it as a competition, the Trial Master continued. They sought to prove their superiority, to demonstrate their advanced techniques. They forgot that the purpose of food is to nourish, not to impress. Grok had stopped poking at his cooking fire and was staring at his hands. Grok has been setting food on fire for 200 years, but today Grok learned that fire can cook, not just burn. And I learned that absorbing nutrients and creating flavors are entirely different skills, Wisp chimed, their gaseous form shifting through pleased colors. Collaboration produces far more satisfying results than solitary photosynthesis. The Void Devourers were transforming too. Their massive, threatening forms were shifting into something more benign, still large and somewhat intimidating, but more like cosmic gardeners than interdimensional predators. "We weren't always like this," one of them explained, gesturing with a tentacle that now ended in something resembling a watering can. 3,000 years of bad food and failed trials turned us into monsters. But proper nourishment has reminded us who we used to be. Jake pulled out his worn notebook, the same one he'd been reading recipes from all day, and looked at his grandmother's handwriting with new appreciation. "You know what the weirdest part is?" he said. "My grandmother would have loved this. She always said that good food brings people together, but I never thought she meant it literally across species and dimensions." The Trial Master's form continued shifting, revealing what looked like a cosmic library filled with recipe collections from across the galaxy. "Your grandmother's recipes will be preserved here," the Trial Master announced, "alongside the greatest culinary wisdom from every civilization. The Galactic Hunger Trial is now complete, and the knowledge you've shared will help prevent future cosmic hangover situations." Jake looked around at his unlikely cooking team, a perfectionist crystal, a reformed pyromaniac, and a photosynthetic gas cloud, and realized something that would have seemed impossible just 3 days ago. "So we're like a cooking crew now?" "The universe could use more collaborative cooking crews," the Trial Master observed, "especially ones that remember that the point is to feed people, not to show off." The Void Devourers, now looking more like cosmic farmers than interdimensional threats, gathered around Jake's cooking station for one final meal together. "Before you go," one of them said, "could you write down that soup recipe? Just in case we get hungry again." 6 months later, Jake Martinez was standing in his grandmother's old kitchen in Toledo, staring at a holographic contract that would have made his head spin if he hadn't already spent several weeks having his head spun by interdimensional cooking competitions. "So let me get this straight," he said to his agent, a small blue alien named Pip, who communicated through interpretive dance and somehow managed to negotiate better deals than most Hollywood lawyers. 17 Star Systems want to publish Grandma's recipes?" Pip performed what Jake had learned was the galactic equivalent of an enthusiastic thumbs up. The past few months had been a blur of the kind of success that only happens to plumbers who accidentally become cosmic celebrities. Jake's grandmother's soup recipe was now taught in culinary academies across 3 galactic quadrants. His impromptu cooking lessons on planet Zarian had been recorded by the Trial Master and were now required viewing for any species wanting to join the Intergalactic Culinary Exchange Program. More importantly, his cooking crew had stayed together. Zephyr had opened Precision and Comfort, a restaurant that somehow combined crystalline geometric perfection with human comfort food. The reviews were universally positive, with critics particularly praising the mathematically perfect grilled cheese sandwiches and soup bowls designed according to optimal flavor distribution algorithms. Grok had become the galaxy's most popular barbecue pitmaster after completing a rigorous fire safety certification program. His restaurant-controlled burn featured a motto that Jake was particularly proud of: "Fire is flavor, not catastrophe." Grok still occasionally set things on fire that weren't supposed to be on fire, but now he did it on purpose and with proper ventilation. Wisp had discovered a talent for food photography, using their light manipulation abilities to create images so beautiful that several major food networks had offered them exclusive contracts. They'd started a cooking show called Photosynthesis to Fork that was surprisingly popular among species that actually needed to eat food the traditional way. Jake had kept the most important thing from his adventure: perspective. Turned out that the same skills that made him a good plumber, looking at a problem, figuring out what was actually broken, and fixing it with whatever tools he had available, also made him a decent cook and an accidentally effective cosmic diplomat. His kitchen counter was now covered with thank you notes from across the galaxy, written in languages he couldn't read but somehow understood the sentiment. The Void Devourers had sent him a fruit basket, well, what passed for fruit in their dimension, with a note that read, "Thanks for reminding us that sometimes the best solutions are the simple ones." The interdimensional delivery service had also brought him something else: a new worn notebook, this one from Zephyr. It was filled with precisely calculated recipes that somehow managed to capture the warmth of his grandmother's cooking, while satisfying a crystalline's need for geometric perfection. Grok had sent him a fire extinguisher with "for emergencies only" written on it in large, friendly letters. Wisp had sent him a small crystal that could provide perfect cooking light anywhere in the universe, which was probably the most practical gift Jake had ever received. But the best part was the standing invitation to return to planet Xerion, which had been transformed into a culinary school and retreat center, whenever he wanted to teach more cooking classes or just hang out with his interdimensional cooking crew. Jake looked at his grandmother's picture on the kitchen wall and smiled. "You know what, Grandma?" he said, pulling ingredients out of the refrigerator. "I think you would have gotten a real kick out of this whole thing, feeding people across the galaxy with your soup recipe. That's exactly the kind of ridiculous thing you would have loved." He started chopping vegetables for dinner, using techniques he'd learned from 3 different alien species and seasoning blends that had never existed on Earth before his cosmic adventure. Tomorrow, he had a video call scheduled with a cooking show from the Andromeda Galaxy, and next week Pip had arranged for him to teach a masterclass on practical cooking for cosmic crises at the Galactic Culinary Institute. But tonight he was just making soup in his grandmother's kitchen, the same way she taught him when he was 7 years old, with one small difference. Now he knew that good food really could bring people together, even if those people happened to be from different dimensions and had varying numbers of tentacles. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Jake, it's Zephyr. Grok set the restaurant on fire again. Need backup. Bring soup." Jake grabbed his jacket, his backpack with the emergency seasoning supplies, and his grandmother's notebook. Some things never changed, whether you were in Toledo or on the other side of the galaxy. And honestly, he wouldn't have it any other way.